When kingship from heaven was lowered, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king and reigned 28,800 years. Alalgar reigned 36,000 years. Two kings thus reigned its 54,000 years, from the Sumerian King List, circa 2100 BCE. What if these numbers are not mythology but memory? What if the kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years were not human at all? Could the oldest historical document in existence be hiding evidence of an extraterrestrial dynasty that shaped humanity's destiny? In the ancient city of Nippur, buried beneath millennia of sand and forgotten by time, archaeologists in 1906 unearthed clay tablets that would challenge everything we thought we knew about human history. These weren't mere legends or religious texts. They were administrative records, genealogies, and chronicles of rulers whose reigns stretched across epochs that dwarf the entirety of recorded civilization. The Sumerian King List names kings who ruled for 30,000 years, rulers who governed before a great flood, beings described with powers that defy natural law. Academic consensus dismisses these as mythological exaggerations, symbolic representations of divine authority projected onto mortal rulers. But what if conventional interpretation has missed something profound? What if these records describe exactly what they claim? What we are about to explore are propositions highly controversial within mainstream archaeology and history. These interpretations challenge established academic consensus and venture into territory where evidence meets speculation. As Aristotle once wrote, it is the mark of an educated mind to entertain a thought without accepting it. What follows requires an open mind, willing to examine alternative perspectives, while maintaining intellectual rigor. We will present both conventional interpretations and alternative hypotheses, allowing you to draw your own conclusions about one of history's most enigmatic documents. The Sumerian King List exists in multiple versions across more than 15 clay tablets and fragments discovered throughout Mesopotamia. The most complete version, known as the Weld-Blundell Prism, stands in the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford University. This four-sided clay prism, inscribed around 2100 BCE during the reign of Utu-Hegel of Uruk, contains the most comprehensive account of Sumerian kingship from its mythical origins to historical times. The text divides history into two distinct epochs, separated by a cataclysmic flood, an event so significant it serves as the chronological anchor point for ancient Mesopotamian history. Before the flood, the King List names 8 kings who ruled 5 cities over a combined period of 241 to 200 years. After the flood, dynasties continue with gradually diminishing reign lengths until they approach recognizable human lifespans by the historical period around 2600 BCE. The precision of this document is remarkable. It names specific rulers, their fathers' names when applicable, the cities where they reigned, and the exact number of years each ruled. This is not the structure of mythology, but of historical chronicle, the same format used for undisputed historical kings of later periods. The city of Eridu, where kingship first descended from heaven according to the text, has been excavated and confirmed as one of the oldest settlements in southern Mesopotamia, dating to approximately 5400 BCE. The archaeological record validates the existence of these ancient cities mentioned in the King List. Ur, Uruk, Kish, Lagash, and others were real urban centers whose ruins still stand today. The later kings mentioned in the list, those ruling after approximately 2600 BCE, can be verified through independent archaeological evidence, including royal seals, building inscriptions, and administrative tablets. This verification of later entries lends credibility to the document's overall historical nature, raising the question of why ancient scribes would suddenly shift from pure fantasy to fact at an arbitrary point in the narrative. The conventional academic interpretation views the antediluvian kings with their impossible lifespans as mythological constructs serving political and theological purposes. According to mainstream Sumerology, these figures represent the Sumerian concept of time immemorial, when the gods directly ruled Earth before transferring kingship to human intermediaries. The exaggerated reign lengths symbolize the sacred nature of early kingship, connecting mortal rulers to divine legitimacy. Scholars note parallels with other ancient traditions that place legendary or semi-divine rulers at the beginning of civilization. The biblical genealogies in Genesis list patriarchs like Methuselah, who lived 969 years, and Adam, who lived 930 years. Ancient Egyptian king lists include gods and demigods, ruling for thousands of years before the historical dynasties. The Hindu Puranas describe epochs spanning millions of years. From this perspective, extreme longevity serves as a literary device, establishing the antiquity and divine sanction of kingship. Thorkild Jacobsen, one of the foremost Sumerologists of the 20th century, argued that the king list functioned as political propaganda, legitimizing current dynasties by connecting them to an unbroken chain of rulers stretching back to the gods themselves. Samuel Noah Kramer, another giant in Sumerian studies, viewed the antediluvian section as pure mythology with no historical kernel, a theological statement about the divine origins of civilization rather than an attempt at actual history. Modern scholars typically interpret the sexagesimal numerical system used by the Sumerians as potentially leading to transcription errors or symbolic number schemes, where certain numbers carried religious significance rather than literal meaning. The number 3600, for instance, was associated with the god Anu and appears repeatedly in Sumerian mathematical texts as a sacred quantity. However, there exists an alternative interpretation that takes these ancient records at face value, or rather interprets them through a radically different lens, one that has been championed most famously by Zecharia Sitchin and subsequent ancient astronaut theorists. This interpretation suggests that the Sumerian King List preserves genuine historical memory of non-human rulers, specifically extraterrestrial beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, who governed Earth before gradually transferring power to human-alien hybrids and eventually to pure humans as the alien presence diminished. According to this hypothesis, the extraordinary reign lengths reflect not mythology, but biological reality. These early kings were not human, and therefore not subject to human lifespans. If the Anunnaki possessed life expectancies vastly exceeding ours, whether through advanced genetics, medical technology, or fundamental biological differences, reigns of 20 or 30,000 years become plausible rather than impossible. Sitchin proposed that the Anunnaki came from a planet called Nibiru, with an orbital period of 3,600 years. If these beings measured time by their own planetary cycles, rather than Earth years, the chronology might need recalculation, though this explanation has been challenged even by other alternative researchers who note that the text explicitly references Earth-based events and seasonal cycles. A more intriguing possibility emerges when examining the pattern of declining reign lengths. The king list shows a clear trend from the antediluvian kings ruling tens of thousands of years to early post-flood dynasties with reigns of hundreds to thousands of years, to later periods approaching normal human lifespans. This gradient suggests not mythological corruption, but rather genetic dilution. If early rulers were pure Anunnaki, middle period kings were Anunnaki human hybrids, with progressively more human DNA, and late period rulers were essentially human with perhaps traces of alien ancestry. The declining lifespans would reflect increasing human genetic dominance over generations of interbreeding. This interpretation finds support in numerous Sumerian texts describing the Anunnaki creating a slave species by genetically modifying existing hominids, then subsequently interbreeding with their creation. But let us examine what the texts themselves actually say, for there is a particular detail in one lesser-known tablet that dramatically shifts how we must interpret the entire king list, a detail that Orthodox scholarship rarely addresses and that we will return to when we discuss the post-flood dynasty of Kish. For now, let us establish the foundation by examining each antediluvian ruler individually. The king list begins with these words: "When kingship from heaven was lowered, the kingship was in Eridu." This opening phrase is crucial. Kingship was lowered from heaven, not established by human consensus, not arising naturally from social evolution, but lowered, a term suggesting deliberate placement from above. The first king, Alulim, ruled Eridu for 28,800 years. Eridu was no ordinary city. Sumerian mythology identifies it as the first city ever created. the dwelling place of Enki, god of wisdom and water. Archaeological excavation reveals that Eridu was indeed among the earliest settlements in Mesopotamia, with occupation layers dating to the Ubaid period around 5400 BCE. The city's main temple, the Iabzu, was dedicated to Enki and rebuilt repeatedly over thousands of years on the same sacred spot, suggesting continuous religious significance across millennia. What kind of ruler governs for 28,800 years? To put this in perspective, this single reign exceeds the entire span of recorded human history from the first writing systems to the present day. It encompasses the rise and fall of every civilization we know. The very notion strains credulity when applied to a biological human being, whose maximum lifespan might reach 100 years under ideal conditions. Yet the text presents this figure with the same matter-of-fact tone it uses for verifiable historical kings like Gilgamesh of Uruk, whose reign is dated to approximately 2700 BCE and whose historical existence is supported by contemporary inscriptions. Kal-Algar succeeded Alulim and ruled for 36,000 years, also from Eridu. The combined reigns of these two kings alone span 64,800 years, a period longer than anatomically modern Homo sapiens have existed according to current paleoanthropology, which places the emergence of our species around 300,000 years ago, but behavioral modernity and complex culture only within the last 50,000 to 100,000 years. Then kingship moved to Bad Tibira, where 3 consecutive rulers held power. Enmen-Luana reigned 43,200 years. Enmen-Galana ruled 28,800 years. The divine Dumuzid, described as a shepherd, governed for 36,000 years. The presence of Dumuzid is particularly noteworthy because he appears throughout Sumerian mythology not merely as a king but as a god, specifically the god of shepherds and fertility, consort to the goddess Inanna. His inclusion in the king list as a historical ruler governing a real city for a specific duration blurs the boundary between divine mythology and human history in a way that conventional interpretation struggles to explain. If Dumuzid is purely mythological, why place him in a chronological sequence with verifiable historical figures? If he is historical, why is he worshipped as a god in other texts? The alternative interpretation offers a coherent answer to both questions. Dumuzid was real, was a ruler, and was perceived as divine because he was Anunnaki, a being whose advanced nature and extended lifespan made him appear godlike to human subjects. Kingship then moved to Larak, where Ensipa-Ziana ruled 28,800 years, then to Sipar, where Enmendur-Ana held power for 21,000 years. Enmendur-Ana is of exceptional interest because he may be identical to the biblical figure Enoch, the 7th patriarch before the flood, who according to Genesis did not die but was taken by God. The Mesopotamian tradition describes Enmendur-Ana as the founder of divination, as one who received secret knowledge directly from the gods and recorded divine wisdom for posterity. The Book of Enoch, a Jewish apocalyptic text from the Second Temple period, though drawing on older traditions, describes Enoch's journey to heaven, where he receives cosmic secrets and meets the Watchers, a group of angels who descended to earth and interbred with human women, producing giant offspring called Nephilim. The parallel is striking. Both figures occupy the 7th position in their respective king or patriarch lists. Both are associated with secret knowledge and divine revelation. Both have connections to beings from heaven who interact with humanity in ways that produce consequences, requiring divine intervention in the form of a flood. Finally, kingship moved to Shuruppak, where Ubar-Tutu ruled 18,600 years. Ubar-Tutu's significance extends beyond his own reign because his son, according to Sumerian tradition, was Ziusudra, the flood hero who survived the deluge by building a great boat at divine instruction, preserving humanity and animal life while the gods destroyed the corrupt world with water. Ziusudra is the Sumerian equivalent of the Babylonian Utnapishtim and the biblical Noah. The placement of Ubar-Tutu as the final antediluvian king, with his son surviving the flood to continue humanity, creates a genealogical bridge between the antediluvian world and the post-flood era. This is not random mythological arrangement, but carefully constructed chronology maintaining lineage continuity through the cataclysm. These 8 kings across 5 cities ruled a combined 241 to 200 years before the flood swept over the land. Then, the text states matter-of-factly, the flood swept over. After the flood had swept over, when kingship was lowered from heaven, the kingship was in Kish. The flood marks the great discontinuity in human history according to Mesopotamian tradition. Every major civilization in the region preserved memories of this cataclysm. The Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh contains the flood narrative where Utnapishtim describes how the gods decided to destroy humanity, how Ea secretly warned him, how he built a boat, survived the deluge, and was granted immortality. The Sumerian Eridu Genesis tells how the gods created humans, how humanity multiplied and became noisy, disturbing the gods, how Enlil decided to destroy them with a flood, and how Enki saved Ziusudra. The Atrahasis epic provides the most detailed Mesopotamian account, explaining that humans were created to serve as workers for the gods, but became too numerous and troublesome, prompting Enlil to attempt their destruction through plague, drought, and finally flood. Geological and archaeological evidence actually supports the occurrence of massive flooding in Mesopotamia, though debate continues about scale and dating. Sir Leonard Woolley's excavations at Ur in the 1920s uncovered an 8-foot layer of clean water-laid clay, with no artifacts, separating 2 cultural levels, which he initially interpreted as evidence of Noah's flood. Subsequent excavations at other Mesopotamian sites found similar flood deposits, though not all contemporary with each other, suggesting multiple regional flood events rather than one universal deluge. The Younger Dryas period, approximately 12,900 to 11,700 years ago, marked by sudden climatic changes and massive flooding as glacial ice sheets melted rapidly, offers a possible natural explanation for ancient flood memories preserved across multiple cultures. Some researchers propose that the flooding of the Black Sea basin around 5600 BCE, when rising Mediterranean waters breached the Bosphorus and transformed a freshwater lake into a saltwater sea, may have been catastrophic enough to generate lasting cultural trauma and mythological memory among populations displaced by the inundation. But there is something peculiar about how the Sumerian texts describe the cause of the flood, something that distinguishes it from natural disaster and suggests deliberate action. The Atrahasis epic is explicit. The gods specifically decided to destroy humanity. This was not divine judgment of moral corruption, as in the biblical account where human wickedness provokes God's wrath, but rather annoyance at human noise and overpopulation. The text states that 1200 years had not yet passed when the land extended and the peoples multiplied. The land was bellowing like a bull. The god got disturbed with their uproar. Enlil heard their noise and addressed the great gods. The noise of mankind has become too intense for me. With their uproar I am deprived of sleep. The solution? Let there be plague. Let the disease god Namtar diminish their noise. When plague failed to sufficiently reduce population, Enlil tried drought. When drought failed, he proposed the ultimate solution. Let the flood sweep over, let it rise up over the earth. But Enki, the god of wisdom who had originally created humans, opposed this genocide. He secretly warned Atrahasis to build a boat, preserving humanity against Enlil's wishes. When Enlil discovered that humans had survived, he was furious, demanding to know which god had violated the divine council's decision. This narrative presents the flood not as divine justice, but as an extermination attempt, a deliberate act of genocide motivated not by human evil, but by overpopulation and noise. The gods created humans as workers, as slaves to perform labor the gods themselves no longer wished to do. But humanity exceeded its intended purpose, multiplied beyond control, and became a nuisance to be eliminated. From the alternative perspective, this story makes chilling sense when interpreted through the lens of ancient astronaut theory. The Anunnaki created humans through genetic engineering to serve as a labor force, perhaps mining gold or performing other tasks essential to the alien civilization. Humans proved successful, too successful, reproducing rapidly and potentially threatening to equal or exceed their creators in number. The solution was systematic reduction of the population through various means. culminating in the use or exploitation of a natural catastrophe to accomplish near-total extermination. One faction led by Enlil advocated complete destruction, while another faction led by Enki opposed genocide and secretly preserved human survivors, ensuring the species' continuation. This internal conflict among the Anunnaki regarding the fate of humanity appears repeatedly in Sumerian texts under various guises. As we examine this interpretation, it becomes essential to ask whether we are looking at mythology symbolically representing human-divine relationships, or historical documents describing actual events through the conceptual framework available to ancient scribes. Like Enki, who shared forbidden knowledge with humanity despite the consequences, this exploration shares information that challenges official narratives and invites you to examine evidence most academic institutions prefer to leave unquestioned. If this approach resonates with you, if you value investigations that push beyond comfortable consensus toward uncomfortable questions, consider subscribing to this channel. We undertake these journeys regularly, exploring ancient mysteries that deserve deeper examination than conventional scholarship provides. Your support allows us to continue producing comprehensive documentaries that honor the complexity of these subjects while respecting your intelligence enough to present evidence without demanding what conclusions you must reach. Now let us return to what happened after the flood, for it is in the post-Diluvian period that the King List becomes most interesting and most problematic for conventional interpretation. After the flood swept over, when kingship was lowered from heaven a second time, we should note, the kingship was in Kish. The first dynasty of Kish contained 23 kings who ruled a combined 24,510 years, 3 months and 3.5 days. The precision of that final measurement, 3.5 days, is remarkable and suggestive of actual record-keeping rather than mythological invention. Why would mythology concern itself with half-day precision while simultaneously claiming reign lengths of thousands of years? The first king of post-flood Kish was Ga-ur, who ruled for 200 years. Already we see dramatic reduction from antediluvian reigns. Still impossible by human standards, but significantly shorter than the 28,800 or 36,000-year reigns before the flood. This declining pattern continues throughout the list. The second king of Kish, Gula-nidaba Anapad, ruled 960 years. The pattern continues downward through subsequent rulers until, by the historical period around 2600 BCE, reign lengths enter plausible human ranges of 20 to 40 years. But here is that detail I mentioned earlier, the one that conventional scholarship rarely addresses adequately. Within the king list itself, several kings are explicitly identified as contemporaries of each other, ruling different cities at the same time. For example, Mesanapada of Ur and Aga of Kish are both attested in contemporary inscriptions as ruling simultaneously, yet the king list presents them in sequence as if one succeeded the other. This is not an error or confusion, but reveals the document's true nature and purpose. The king list is not attempting to provide a comprehensive chronological history of every ruler across Mesopotamia, but rather tracing a single continuous line of legitimate kingship as it moved from city to city. When kingship transferred from one city to another, previous dynasties might continue ruling their own cities, but they no longer possessed supreme kingship according to the theological political framework of the document. This interpretation is crucial because it means the chronology is not meant to be added linearly. The 241,200 years before the flood and the centuries after do not represent continuous elapsed time, but rather the cumulative reigns of rulers considered bearers of legitimate kingship at different locations across potentially overlapping time periods. However, this conventional solution to the chronological problem, while resolving some issues, creates others. If we are not meant to take the chronology literally, why the precise numerical records? Why not simply state that various kings ruled in divine antiquity, leaving numbers vague as much mythology does? The specificity of the figures suggests the ancient scribes considered them meaningful and accurate within their own framework of measurement and record-keeping. Let us examine what the Sumerian texts themselves say about the origin of humanity, for this context is essential to understanding why the King List presents such extraordinary claims. The Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic based on earlier Sumerian traditions, describes how the world was created not through divine word or cosmic egg, but through violence among the gods. The primordial goddess Tiamat and her consort Apsu represent chaos and the salt and fresh waters. The younger gods, too noisy and disruptive, disturb Apsu's rest. Sound familiar? The noise motif that will later justify the flood already appears in the creation narrative. Apsu plots to kill the younger gods, but Ea discovers the plot and kills Apsu first. Tiamat seeks revenge, giving birth to monsters and raising an army. Marduk, son of Ea, defeats Tiamat in battle, splits her body to create heaven and earth from her corpse, and organizes the cosmos. The gods then face a problem. Who will do the work of maintaining creation? The assembly of gods complains to Marduk that they need servants. Marduk proposes a solution recorded in Tablet 6. He will create mankind, a savage man I will create. He shall be charged with the service of the gods that they might be at ease. The method of creation is significant. Marduk does not create humans from clay or divine breath, but from the blood of a slain god. Kingu, who had led Tiamat's army, is executed, and from his blood humanity is formed. This gives humans divine essence, literally containing god blood in their nature, but specifically the blood of a rebellious, defeated god, positioning humanity as simultaneously connected to divinity and fundamentally subordinate and corrupt. The Atrahasis epic provides more detail about human creation. The gods were digging rivers, canals, piling up their silt on hills, and raising dikes. The work was hard, the distress was much. The junior gods complained, demanding relief from their labors. The great gods met in council and agreed that a solution was needed. Enki proposed creating a substitute worker. Let Belet Ili, the birth goddess, create offspring. Let man assume the drudgery of God. The method is described with what sounds like a technical procedure. They slaughtered Geshtui, a god who possessed intelligence, in their assembly. Nintu mixed clay with his flesh and blood. From this mixture, 7 males and 7 females were created. The birth goddess gathered clay, kneaded it with the flesh and blood of the god, shaped it, and gestated it in the wombs of birth goddesses who served as surrogates. The description emphasizes blood, flesh, clay, and a multi-stage process involving mixing, shaping, and gestational development. From the alternative perspective, this sounds remarkably like genetic engineering expressed in terms comprehensible to ancient people lacking modern scientific vocabulary. The god's blood and flesh could represent DNA, the clay could symbolize the base material being modified, the mixing process could describe genetic manipulation, and the use of surrogate goddesses could refer to artificial insemination or embryo implantation. The text even specifies that 14 wombs were used, suggesting a systematic procedure rather than spontaneous creation. Multiple Sumerian texts reference this human creation event, always emphasizing that humans were deliberately designed for servitude. The Sumerian text known as the creation of the pickaxe celebrates the invention of the tool that allows humans to dig and perform agricultural labor, describing how Enlil used the pickaxe to break open the earth at a place called Uzumua, from which sprouted humans like plants growing from seeds. This strange image of humans sprouting from the earth might be explained as metaphorical, or alternatively as describing an event witnessed by people who had no framework for understanding genetics, cloning, or accelerated growth procedures, and interpreted what they saw through agricultural metaphors they understood. Another text, Enki and Ninmah, describes Enki and the mother goddess Ninmah drunkenly competing to see who could create the most functional human types. They experiment with different forms, creating disabled or deformed beings, each trying to find uses for these flawed creations. This narrative, disturbing in its implications, suggests trial and error, experimentation with genetic combinations, producing various results including failures before achieving the desired product. It reads less like theology and more like laboratory notes. The text is too specific, too focused on the mechanics of creation to dismiss simply as metaphor. What makes these creation accounts particularly intriguing is their consistency across multiple texts from different periods and locations. The Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians, spanning over 2,000 years of Mesopotamian history, all preserved essentially the same narrative. Humans were created by the gods, mixing divine essence with earthly material to produce workers to serve the gods. This was not a one-time divine act of sovereign will, but a response to a labor shortage, a practical solution to a logistical problem. The gods needed workers and created an intelligent species genetically capable of understanding instructions and performing complex tasks, but limited enough to remain subordinate. If we strip away the theological language and examine the underlying claims, we have beings described as coming from the sky, possessing advanced knowledge and capabilities, creating a new species through biological manipulation, establishing themselves as rulers over their creation, and eventually dealing with the consequences when their creation exceeded its original parameters. This is not theology. This is colonialism and genetic engineering, described through the only framework available to Bronze Age scribes. The Sumerian texts preserve extraordinarily detailed descriptions of these gods, or Anunnaki. They were not ethereal spirits or abstract forces, but physical beings with bodies, needs, emotions, and limitations. They ate and drank. They became ill. They engaged in sexual relationships, producing offspring. They argued and fought both with each other and occasionally with humans. They used tools and technologies. They traveled between heaven and earth via flying vehicles. Multiple texts describe the Anunnaki arriving from the sky, specifically from the heavens, and establishing cities on earth. The Sumerian word for their point of origin, Nibiru, appears repeatedly, but with some ambiguity about whether it refers to a planet, a celestial body like a star or Jupiter, or the crossing point of celestial paths. Sitchin's interpretation of Nibiru as a 10th planet with a 3,600-year elliptical orbit remains controversial, even among ancient astronaut theorists, as the astronomical evidence for such a planet is lacking and would require it to have an orbit incompatible with what we know about solar system dynamics. However, the concept of the Anunnaki coming from somewhere other than Earth is explicit in the texts, regardless of which celestial body we identify as their origin. The texts describe two main groups of Anunnaki: the senior gods, numbering around 50, who ruled and made decisions, and a much larger group of junior gods, or Igigi, numbering 300 in heaven and 600 in earth, according to some accounts, who performed labor before human creation. These junior gods are the ones who complained about work conditions and whose rebellion prompted the creation of humans as substitute workers. The hierarchy was clear. Anu ruled in heaven. Enlil ruled the air and earth's surface. Enki ruled the subterranean waters and was associated with wisdom and technical knowledge. Other major deities included Ninhursag, the mother goddess, Inanna, goddess of love and war, Utu, the sun god who was associated with justice, and Nanna, the moon god. What is striking about these gods is their specialization. Enki is particularly associated with mining, metallurgy, engineering, water management, and genetics. Enlil governs administration, law, agriculture, and weather control. Ninhursag specializes in medicine and biological creation. This division of expertise sounds less like theological symbolism and more like a colonization team with different members possessing specialized knowledge relevant to establishing civilization on a new world. The physical descriptions of the Anunnaki in ancient art and texts present them as essentially humanoid, but larger and more imposing than ordinary humans. Numerous texts reference the great stature of the gods, the giant offspring called Nephilim in biblical tradition, and equivalent figures in Mesopotamian myth, are described as products of god-human interbreeding, suggesting genetic compatibility between the species. This compatibility is itself significant. If the Anunnaki were truly extraterrestrial, why would they be reproductively compatible with humans? The alternative interpretation offers an answer. Humans were genetically engineered specifically to be compatible with the Anunnaki because humans were created using Anunnaki genetic material as the template, modifying existing Homo erectus or Homo heidelbergensis populations by introducing Anunnaki DNA to produce Homo sapiens. This would explain both the reproductive compatibility and the curious fact that humans are simultaneously similar to earlier hominids in our basic anatomy, while possessing cognitive and linguistic capabilities that appear suddenly in the archaeological record without clear evolutionary precedent. The standard evolutionary model shows gradual development of human traits over millions of years, but certain capabilities, language, abstract thinking, symbolic representation, complex tool use, appear relatively suddenly around 50,000 to 100,000 years ago. Some paleoanthropologists call this the Great Leap Forward, or the Upper Paleolithic Revolution, acknowledging that something changed dramatically in human cognitive capability within a relatively brief time frame. Conventional explanation attributes this to gradual genetic changes, reaching a threshold that enabled symbolic thinking. Alternative interpretation suggests direct genetic modification by the Anunnaki, inserting the genes responsible for higher cognition into pre-existing hominid populations. The Sumerian texts describe specific locations where these gods operated, and intriguingly, many of these locations correspond to areas of significant archaeological mystery. Enki's domain was the Abzu, described as subterranean waters, but also as a place where he performed his technical work, including the creation of humans. Some texts locate the Abzu at Eridu, while others suggest it was a broader region. Eridu, as mentioned, is one of the oldest cities in Mesopotamia, with continuous occupation spanning millennia. Excavations reveal that the earliest levels contain sophisticated architectural remains, including monumental religious structures far more advanced than would be expected from the earlier stages of civilization. The temple platform at Eridu underwent at least 10 rebuilding phases, each constructed directly atop the ruins of its predecessor, maintaining the same location and orientation across thousands of years. This continuity suggests the site held special significance from the very beginning of Sumerian culture. But there is something else about Eridu that archaeologists have struggled to explain. The earliest occupation level at Eridu contains pottery and cultural material that appears suddenly fully formed without clear developmental stages in the local area. The Ubaid period culture that first occupied Eridu shows sophisticated ceramic technology, organized settlement planning, and architectural knowledge that seems to have arrived complete rather than developing gradually. Conventional archaeology attributes this to migration of already developed cultures from elsewhere, but it raises the question, where is elsewhere, and why do we not find the developmental stages there either? Baalbek in modern Lebanon, though outside Mesopotamia proper, was known in ancient times as a site where the gods descended and ascended. The temple complex at Baalbek sits on a foundation platform constructed of megalithic stones that rank among the largest worked stones ever quarried. 3 stones in the western wall, called the trilithon, each weigh approximately 800 tons. A 4th stone, never moved from the quarry but clearly intended for the complex, weighs an estimated 1,200 tons. These stones were quarried 3/4 of a mile away, transported, lifted, and placed with precision that modern engineering struggles to explain. Roman construction certainly existed at Baalbek, but the Roman work sits on top of much older megalithic foundations that no ancient Roman text claims credit for. The Romans called the site Heliopolis, City of the Sun, and built elaborate temples there, but they considered the site sacred long before Roman occupation, suggesting pre-Roman cultures recognized its significance. Eridu and Baalbek represent just 2 examples of ancient sites whose archaeological record presents anomalies challenging conventional timelines and technological assumptions. As we progress through this investigation, we will encounter more such locations, but there is one particular site that demands special attention now because of its direct connection to the Sumerian King List and to the question of how long humans and potentially non-humans have been building monumental architecture on Earth. That site is Göbekli Tepe. But before we explore this extraordinary location, I must mention something crucial about dating and chronology that affects everything we are discussing. We will return to that detail shortly, but first I want you to understand why Göbekli Tepe changes everything. The Sumerian King List places the origin of kingship at around 240,000 years before the flood, then continues with post-flood dynasties back to approximately 4,000 to 5,000 years ago for the historical kings we can verify. If we take the long chronology even partially seriously, we are discussing advanced civilization existing at time periods conventional archaeology considers inhabited only by primitive hunter-gatherers. Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Turkey, discovered in 1994 and excavated primarily by Klaus Schmidt until his death in 2014, has been radiocarbon dated to approximately 9,600 BCE, making it roughly 11,600 years old. That date places Göbekli Tepe firmly in the pre-pottery Neolithic period, before the invention of pottery, before the development of agriculture, before the domestication of animals, before permanent settlements, before everything we thought was necessary for monumental architecture. Yet Göbekli Tepe contains massive T-shaped limestone pillars weighing up to 20 tons, carved with sophisticated reliefs of animals, including lions, foxes, gazelles, snakes, scorpions, birds, and other creatures. The pillars are arranged in circles, with two larger central pillars in each enclosure, surrounded by smaller pillars embedded in stone walls. The engineering required to quarry, transport, carve, and erect these pillars implies planning, organization, specialized labor, and technical knowledge that supposedly did not exist in 9,600 BCE. Schmidt himself argued that Göbekli Tepe required a complex society to construct, but that presents a problem, because there is no evidence of such society in the region at that time. No cities, no agriculture, no permanent settlements, just mobile hunter-gatherer bands. This apparent paradox led Schmidt to propose that religion came before civilization, that the desire to build sacred sites motivated people to organize in ways that eventually led to agriculture and settlement as secondary developments to support the religious center. This interpretation reverses the standard model of civilization, which holds that agriculture surplus enables specialization, which allows some people to become priests who then build temples. Schmidt suggested instead that temple building came first, requiring organization that drove agricultural development. It is a fascinating solution, but it raises as many questions as it answers. Who taught these hunter-gatherers to carve stone? Where did the architectural knowledge come from? Why did they choose to suddenly start building on a monumental scale unprecedented in human history? And perhaps most intriguingly, why did they bury it? Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried around 8000 BCE. The enclosures were carefully filled with debris and soil, preserving them but rendering them inaccessible. This was not natural accumulation of sediment, but intentional backfilling. Whoever built Göbekli Tepe also decided to hide it, and we have no idea why. The alternative interpretation suggests a possible answer. If Göbekli Tepe was constructed during or shortly after the era when the Anunnaki directly ruled Earth, when beings with advanced knowledge supervised human civilization, then the sudden appearance of sophisticated architecture makes sense. The knowledge came from above, from teachers who possessed it already. The labor was organized by authorities who commanded obedience. The purpose was religious or ceremonial, yes, but also practical, serving functions we may not fully understand related to the Anunnaki presence on Earth. When that presence ended or diminished after the flood, the site was buried deliberately, perhaps by the Anunnaki themselves or by human followers acting on instructions, preserving it for a future time when humans would be ready to understand. This brings us to that crucial chronological issue I mentioned. The Sumerian King List presents dates that seem impossibly ancient, but what if our understanding of ancient chronology is fundamentally wrong? Conventional archaeology dates the emergence of Sumerian civilization to around 4500 to 4000 BCE, when Ubaid period settlements began developing into urban centers. Writing appears around 3200 BCE with the earliest cuneiform tablets. The early dynastic period, when the historical kings of the King List reigned, spans approximately 2900 to 2350 BCE. This chronology is based on multiple lines of evidence, including radiocarbon dating, pottery sequences, architectural stratigraphy, and textual cross-references with Egyptian and other Near Eastern chronologies. It forms the backbone of our understanding of ancient history. But there is a problem, a significant one that archaeologists are increasingly acknowledging. Many sites show evidence of much older occupation than previously thought. Jericho has occupation layers dating to 9000 BCE. Çatalhöyük in Turkey dates to 7500 BCE. These are not primitive encampments, but organized settlements with sophisticated architecture, art, and apparent social structure. If humans were capable of organized urban life in 9000 BCE, why does civilization supposedly not emerge in Mesopotamia until 4500 BCE? What were people doing for 4500 years? Did civilization actually emerge multiple times, get destroyed, and re-emerge? The geological evidence for massive flooding in the region supports the possibility of civilizational disruption. Sea level rise at the end of the last ice age, concluding around 11,700 years ago, was dramatic. Ocean levels rose approximately 120 meters as glacial ice melted. Coastal areas were inundated. The Persian Gulf, which today is relatively shallow, would have been dry land or a river valley during the Ice Age. Some researchers propose that the original Sumerian civilization developed in the Persian Gulf basin, when it was habitable land, then was flooded as sea levels rose, forcing survivors to migrate to higher ground in southern Mesopotamia, where they re-established civilization using remembered knowledge. This would explain why Sumerian culture appears suddenly in southern Mesopotamia, already possessing writing, mathematics, architecture, and complex social organization. They were not inventing it for the first time, but reconstituting what they had lost. The King List's flood narrative might preserve actual memory of this catastrophe, when the sea level rise drowned the civilization in the Gulf basin, forcing survivors to flee and restart civilization from remnants of knowledge. The extraordinarily long pre-flood reigns could represent accurate king lists from that drowned civilization, measuring time by different standards or using numerical systems we do not fully understand. The post-flood dynasties would then represent the re-established civilization in the Mesopotamian heartland. Mainstream archaeology resists this interpretation because it lacks direct physical evidence of pre-flood civilization in the now submerged Gulf basin, though obviously such evidence would be underwater and unexplored. But underwater archaeology in the Persian Gulf is limited and only beginning to reveal submerged sites. Several submerged settlement sites have been discovered off the coasts of India and in the Mediterranean that push the dates of sophisticated coastal cultures earlier than previously accepted. The discovery of Dwarka off the coast of India, a submerged city that some researchers argue could be 9,000 years old, demonstrates that we have not exhausted the potential for underwater archaeological discoveries. Until comprehensive underwater survey of the Persian Gulf occurs, we cannot definitively rule out the possibility of submerged ruins waiting to be discovered. What does this mean for the Sumerian King List? It means we may be looking at a genuine historical document, preserving real chronology from a much older civilization than conventional archaeology accepts. The antediluvian kings might be accurately recorded rulers from a civilization that existed 10,000 to 15,000 years ago or even earlier, before being destroyed by flooding. The post-flood dynasties represent the rebuilding phase, starting around 4000 to 5000 BCE in the Mesopotamian heartland. The declining reign lengths could reflect changing conditions, different recording methods, genetic changes if the hybrid interpretation is correct, or simply different historical circumstances in the post-flood world. The presence of figures like En-men-dur-ana, Enoch in Hebrew tradition, suggests that knowledge transmission occurred across the flood boundary, that survivors preserved information and teachings from the antediluvian world, passing them to subsequent generations. This interpretation divides researchers sharply. Some see overwhelming evidence that ancient texts preserve genuine historical memory extending far deeper into the past than mainstream archaeology acknowledges, memory of advanced civilizations whose physical remains have been destroyed by cataclysms or remain undiscovered. Others view such interpretation as wishful thinking, reading modern desire for ancient advanced civilizations back into texts that are clearly mythological. What do you think? Do ancient king lists represent historical memory or pure mythology? Does the sudden appearance of sophisticated architecture and culture in various locations suggest influence from a common advanced source, whether extraterrestrial or a lost human civilization, or simply independent development? This question has divided researchers for decades and likely will continue to generate passionate debate. Share your perspective in the comments, as we value the diversity of viewpoints that can illuminate different aspects of these complex questions. Now let us examine specific post-flood dynasties from the King List to understand how dramatically the pattern of reigns changes and what that might signify. After the flood, kingship was lowered from heaven to Kish. The first king of Kish, Ga-ur, ruled 1,200 years. Gula Nidaba Anapad ruled 960 years. Palakinatim ruled 900 years. The decline continues through 23 kings of the first dynasty of Kish. By the time we reach the end of this dynasty, we are down to kings ruling 40 or 50 years, approaching human lifespans. Then kingship moved to Iana in Uruk. Here we encounter a familiar name. Mesgiagasha, son of the sun god Utu, became high priest and king. He ruled 324 years. His son Enmerkar ruled 420 years. Enmerkar was followed by Lugalbanda, who ruled 1,200 years. Then came Dumuzid, the fisherman, ruling 100 years. Then Gilgamesh, whose father was a phantom, ruled 126 years. Here we have Gilgamesh, one of the most famous figures from ancient literature, hero of the Epic of Gilgamesh, an epic that exists in multiple versions and was copied and recited for over 2,000 years across the ancient Near East. Gilgamesh is not mythology. He was a real historical king. Inscriptions from his contemporary kings mention him. The King List of Tumal specifically names Gilgamesh as a king who built or renovated the temple of Enlil at Nippur. His historicity is beyond serious doubt. And yet the King List credits him with a 126-year reign. Even if we assume this is exaggeration, it is modest exaggeration compared to his predecessors. Lugalbanda ruling 1,200 years and Gilgamesh ruling 126 years are 2 generations apart, father and son, according to tradition. Why would one rule 10 times longer than the other if both were pure humans? The alternative interpretation offers clarity. Lugalbanda was at most 1 or 2 generations removed from direct Anunnaki lineage, still possessing enough of their genetics to have extended lifespan. Gilgamesh, described as 2/3 divine and 1/3 human in the epic, represents further genetic dilution. Still superhuman compared to ordinary people, which is why his reign is measured in more than a century, but significantly more human than his predecessors. The Epic of Gilgamesh itself contains details relevant to our investigation. The story describes Gilgamesh as physically superior to normal humans, stronger, taller, more capable. He is described as 2/3 divine, which is a strange fraction if we take it literally, but makes perfect genetic sense if we understand it as describing his ancestry. One parent fully divine, or Anunnaki, the other half Anunnaki, producing offspring that is mathematically 2/3 Anunnaki and 1/3 baseline human. The epic describes Gilgamesh seeking immortality, traveling to find Utnapishtim, the flood survivor who was granted eternal life by the gods. Why would Gilgamesh seek immortality, if not because he, unlike ordinary humans, understood that extended life was possible, that his divine ancestors possessed it, and he resented being denied it? When he finally reaches Utnapishtim and demands the secret of immortality, Utnapishtim tells him that immortality was a special gift from the gods after the flood, not something that can be achieved through effort. He does, however, tell Gilgamesh about a plant that restores youth, growing at the bottom of the ocean. Gilgamesh dives deep, retrieves the plant, but loses it to a serpent on his journey home, accepting finally that mortality is his fate. This narrative is usually interpreted as philosophical meditation on the human condition and acceptance of death's inevitability. But it can also be read as historical account of someone who knew that extended life was possible because his recent ancestors possessed it, sought to regain it, and ultimately failed because the knowledge or technology or genetic characteristics that enabled it were no longer accessible. The serpent stealing the plant might preserve memory of intervention by those who did not want humans to regain extended lifespan, keeping humanity deliberately limited. Remember that in the biblical account, a serpent offers knowledge that God wanted kept from humans, and that knowledge makes humans more like God, causing their expulsion from paradise where they had access to the tree of life, which granted immortality. The themes recur across multiple traditions. Knowledge and immortality offered, then taken away. Humanity created by gods, then limited by gods. Mortals seeking what their creators possess, but being denied. Intermediate period, where lifespans measured centuries, to being ruled by fully human kings with normal lifespans. This transition is documented, tracked, and recorded with precision that suggests it was observed and noteworthy. Why would ancient scribes carefully document a mythological decline in longevity? What would be the symbolic or theological purpose? The standard interpretation holds that this represents literary transition from mythological past to historical present, that the scribes were marking the boundary between legend and fact. But that interpretation fails to explain why the transition is gradual rather than sudden, why specific numbers are given for each step of the decline, and why the text maintains the same documentary format throughout, rather than signaling a genre shift from myth to history. The alternative interpretation sees this as genealogical record of genetic dilution across generations, as Anunnaki bloodlines mixed progressively with baseline human populations, each generation containing less alien DNA and more human DNA, until eventually the lineages became essentially human, with perhaps trace genetic markers remaining. This interpretation gains support from the text's own explicit statements about interbreeding between gods and humans, producing hybrid offspring who became kings, heroes, and founders of royal dynasties. The Bible preserves this tradition in Genesis chapter 6, where the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful and took any they chose as wives, producing the Nephilim, mighty warriors of old, men of renown. The Book of Enoch expands on this, naming specific watchers who descended and mated with human women, teaching humanity forbidden knowledge, including metallurgy, cosmetics, weaponry, astrology, and magic. The offspring of these unions were giants who consumed all the resources, became violent, and ultimately provoked divine intervention in the form of the flood. The parallel with Mesopotamian accounts is unmistakable. Both traditions describe non-human beings from heaven interbreeding with humans, producing exceptional hybrid offspring, teaching advanced knowledge to humanity, and eventually triggering catastrophic divine judgment through flooding meant to eliminate the corrupted bloodlines. The main difference is perspective. The biblical account condemns this interbreeding as sin and corruption. The Mesopotamian accounts present it more neutrally, sometimes positively, as the origin of kingship and civilization, with the flood resulting not from moral judgment, but from population control concerns. Multiple ancient cultures beyond Mesopotamia and Israel preserve similar traditions of gods mating with humans to produce heroic lineages. Greek mythology is filled with demigods, heroes born from unions between Olympian gods and mortals. Heracles, Perseus, Achilles, Helen of Troy, and countless others are described as products of divine human reproduction. These figures possess superhuman strength, beauty, intelligence, or other enhanced capabilities beyond normal human capacity, attributed to their partial divine nature. Roman tradition continues this pattern with their own divine ancestry claims. Egyptian pharaohs claimed descent from the gods, specifically from Ra and later from Horus, asserting divine blood as justification for their right to rule. The pharaonic succession was understood as transmission of divine essence through bloodline, with each pharaoh serving as living God incarnate. Hindu tradition describes the avatars, divine beings descending to earth in physical form, and the dynastic lineages claiming descent from gods or from the original Manu or progenitor of humanity. The Mahabharata and Ramayana describe dynasties founded by divine figures whose descendants ruled for generations, gradually becoming more human over time. Chinese imperial tradition claimed the emperor as son of heaven, possessing the mandate of heaven based on divine ancestry and cosmic authorization. The imperial bloodline was considered sacred, connecting heaven and earth through the person of the emperor. Japanese imperial tradition claims unbroken descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu, making the imperial line literally divine in nature, a belief maintained officially until 1946. Mesoamerican cultures, including the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, preserved traditions of gods descending from the sky and establishing ruling dynasties. The Maya kings claimed descent from the gods and performed bloodletting rituals to maintain the divine essence in their bloodline. The Aztec emperors traced lineage to Quetzalcoatl and other deities. The Inca rulers were considered children of the sun god Inti, with each emperor serving as divine incarnation. This global pattern of divine ancestry, claims among ruling elites, is typically interpreted by anthropologists and historians as political theology, invented mythology designed to legitimize power by claiming supernatural authorization. But the consistency of the pattern across cultures that had no contact with each other is remarkable. Why would cultures on different continents separated by oceans all independently invent the same basic narrative structure of gods, interbreeding with humans to produce ruling dynasties with superhuman capabilities? The conventional answer is that this represents a universal human psychological need to explain social hierarchy through appeals to transcendent authority, that kings everywhere claimed divine descent because it worked as propaganda to maintain their power and discourage rebellion. There is undoubtedly truth to this. We know that ruling elites throughout history have used religious and supernatural claims to reinforce their authority. But does this fully explain the global pattern? Does it explain the specific details that recur across cultures, the emphasis on physical superiority of divine descended lineages, the teaching of knowledge from sky beings, the eventual decline or disappearance of direct divine presence? The alternative interpretation suggests that these traditions preserve fragmented memory of actual events, that an extraterrestrial civilization did establish contact with early humans, did interbreed with selected populations, did establish hybrid bloodlines as ruling castes overseeing humanity, and gradually withdrew their direct presence over time, leaving the hybrid dynasties to continue ruling with progressively more human and less alien genetics. If this occurred, we would expect to find exactly what we do find: global traditions of divine ancestry among ruling elites, descriptions of superhuman capabilities gradually diminishing over generations, and eventual transition to fully human monarchies claiming ancient divine ancestry, but no longer demonstrating the physical superiority or extended lifespans of their legendary predecessors. We would also expect to find genetic anomalies, specific DNA markers, that distinguish these elite bloodlines from the general population, evidence of genetic manipulation or introduction of non-local genetic material into human populations at specific points in our evolutionary history. Do we find such evidence? The answer is complicated and controversial, but there are intriguing data points worth examining. Modern genetics has revealed several puzzles about human evolution that do not fit neatly into the standard model of gradual evolution from earlier hominids. First, there is the question of rapid encephalization, the dramatic increase in brain size that occurred in the human lineage over the past 2 million years. While brain size had been gradually increasing in our hominin ancestors, the acceleration in the last few 100,000 years is remarkable. Homo erectus, existing from approximately 1.9 million years ago to 110,000 years ago, had an average brain size around 900 cubic centimeters. Homo heidelbergensis, appearing around 600,000 years ago, had brains averaging 1,200 cubic centimeters. Anatomically modern humans appearing around 300,000 years ago have average brain sizes of 1,350 cubic centimeters. This represents an increase of 50% in brain volume over a relatively brief evolutionary period, far faster than would be expected from normal evolutionary pressures. Moreover, larger brains come with significant evolutionary costs, including difficult childbirth due to the size of the infant head, extended childhood dependency requiring greater parental investment, and enormous caloric requirements, as the human brain consumes approximately 20% of the body's energy, despite representing only 2% of body mass. For such a costly adaptation to evolve naturally, there must be overwhelming selective advantage. What selective pressure drove such rapid brain expansion? Standard evolutionary theory proposes various possibilities, including climate change forcing cognitive flexibility, social competition, driving intelligence arms races, or dietary changes providing sufficient calories to support larger brains. but none of these explanations fully account for the rapidity and extent of the change. Alternative researchers point to this rapid encephalization as potential evidence of genetic intervention, suggesting that introduction of new genetic material from an advanced species could account for the otherwise inexplicable jump in cognitive capability. Second, there is the FOXP2 gene, often called the language gene, though that term is oversimplified. FOXP2 is involved in the development of neural circuits required for speech and language. Humans have a version of FOXP2 that differs from chimpanzees and other primates in ways that appear functionally significant for our language abilities. Research published in 2009 by Johannes Krause and colleagues demonstrated that Neanderthals shared the human version of FOXP2, suggesting language capability in Neanderthals as well. But here is what is interesting. The human-specific mutations in FOXP2 appear to have become fixed in the population relatively recently in evolutionary terms, within the last 200,000 years. The rapid fixation of these mutations across the entire human population is difficult to explain through normal evolutionary processes unless there was extreme selective pressure favoring individuals with the mutation. Language is certainly advantageous, but why would the specific FOXP2 mutations spread so rapidly when earlier hominids managed for millions of years with the ancestral version? One possibility is that the mutations arose in a small population that then expanded dramatically, carrying the mutation worldwide. But this raises the question of what gave that population such overwhelming advantage that they completely replaced or absorbed all other human populations globally. Another possibility, explored by alternative researchers, is that the FOXP2 mutations were introduced artificially through genetic engineering, inserted into the human genome by the Anunnaki, as part of creating a species capable of understanding complex instructions and communicating effectively to serve as workers. Third, there is the mystery of human chromosome 2. All great apes have 24 pairs of chromosomes for a total of 48. Humans have 23 pairs for a total of 46. This is a significant difference because chromosome number is usually consistent within species, and closely related species typically have the same number. The explanation for this discrepancy was discovered through genetic sequencing, which revealed that human chromosome 2 is actually a fusion of two ancestral ape chromosomes. You can see the evidence directly in our DNA. Human chromosome 2 has remnants of two centromeres, the structures that appear once per chromosome, and it has telomere sequences, which normally appear only at chromosome ends, in the middle of the chromosome where the fusion occurred. This fusion happened in our evolutionary lineage, after our split from the ancestors of chimpanzees. Standard evolutionary interpretation views this as a random mutation that somehow became fixed in the human population despite the potential for reduced fertility when individuals with different chromosome numbers mate. The fusion carrier would have been at reproductive disadvantage unless their offspring also carried the fusion, requiring the mutation to spread through a small population that was partially isolated from the main population, then expand and replace or absorb other populations. This is possible but requires specific demographic conditions. Alternative interpretation questions whether this was truly random. A chromosomal fusion of this type is exactly the kind of genetic modification that advanced genetic engineers might perform to differentiate their created species from the base population, essentially inserting a genetic marker that would permanently distinguish modified humans from unmodified hominids, while also potentially making interbreeding between the two groups less successful, maintaining genetic separation between the new species and its progenitor. Fourth, and perhaps most controversially, there is the question of Rh-negative blood. Approximately 85% of humans have Rh-positive blood, meaning they carry the rhesus factor protein on their red blood cells. About 15% lack this protein and are Rh-negative. The rhesus factor is so named because it was first identified in rhesus monkeys and is present in all other primates. From an evolutionary perspective, we would expect all humans to have Rh-positive blood like our primate ancestors. The absence of the Rh factor in a portion of the human population is anomalous. Standard genetics explains this as a recessive trait, a mutation that deleted the RHD gene responsible for producing the Rh factor protein. This deletion persists in the population following normal Mendelian inheritance. However, there is a complication. When an Rh-negative mother carries an Rh-positive fetus, her immune system may recognize the fetus's Rh-positive blood as foreign and produce antibodies against it, potentially causing hemolytic disease in the fetus, especially in subsequent pregnancies. This is a serious medical issue requiring monitoring and treatment. From an evolutionary standpoint, a trait that causes maternal-fetal incompatibility and fetal harm should be selected against and gradually eliminated from the population. The persistence of Rh-negative blood despite this reproductive disadvantage has puzzled geneticists. Alternative researchers have proposed that Rh-negative blood represents a genetic marker from the Anunnaki, that the alien species lacked the rhesus factor, and when they interbred with Rh-positive humans or created hybrids, some offspring inherited the Rh-negative trait. This would explain why Rh-negative blood exists despite its evolutionary disadvantages, and why it is more common in certain populations, specifically European populations, particularly those with Basque ancestry, where Rh-negative frequency can reach 25 to 35%. The Basque people of northern Spain and southern France have additional genetic peculiarities, including a unique language unrelated to any other known language family, leading to much speculation about their origins. Now, does the existence of Rh-negative blood prove ancient alien genetic engineering? Absolutely not. It can be fully explained within standard genetic frameworks as a deletion mutation that persists due to genetic drift and balanced by factors we may not fully understand. But it is the kind of anomaly that, when combined with other genetic puzzles and the global traditions of divine human interbreeding, creates a pattern suggestive enough to warrant consideration. The real question is not whether any single piece of evidence proves the ancient astronaut hypothesis, but whether the cumulative weight of evidence from mythology, archaeology, genetics, and ancient texts creates a plausible case worthy of serious investigation. Mainstream science has generally dismissed ancient astronaut theories as pseudoscience, and admittedly, much of the popular literature on the topic contains speculation presented as fact, selective use of evidence, and logical leaps not supported by rigorous analysis. But dismissing the entire line of inquiry because some proponents lack scientific rigor is itself unscientific. The proper approach is to examine each piece of evidence on its own merits, consider alternative explanations, and remain open to possibilities even when they challenge established paradigms. After all, many currently accepted scientific theories were once considered fringe or heretical. Continental drift was ridiculed for decades before becoming the foundation of plate tectonic theory. The existence of meteorites was denied by the scientific establishment in the 18th century, despite eyewitness reports and physical evidence. The idea that bacteria could cause ulcers was dismissed as absurd until Barry Marshall proved it by deliberately infecting himself. Science advances not by defending consensus, but by questioning it. Let us examine what modern DNA analysis has revealed about human origins and whether it aligns with or contradicts the ancient astronaut hypothesis. The out-of-Africa model, currently the dominant theory of human origins, holds that anatomically modern humans evolved in Africa between 300,000 and 200,000 years ago, then migrated out of Africa in waves, first around 100,000 to 90,000 years ago with limited success, and then more successfully between 70,000 and 50,000 years ago, spreading across the globe and gradually replacing or absorbing other hominid species, including Neanderthals in Europe and Denisovans in Asia. This model is supported by genetic evidence showing that all modern humans share common maternal ancestry tracing back to Africa, the so-called mitochondrial Eve, living approximately 150,000 to 200,000 years ago, and common paternal ancestry tracing to Y-chromosomal Adam, living approximately 200,000 to 300,000 years ago. These are not actual individuals named Eve and Adam, but rather the most recent common ancestors through unbroken maternal and paternal lines respectively. The genetic diversity of African populations is greater than that of all non-African populations combined, consistent with Africa being the ancestral homeland where humans existed longest and accumulated the most genetic variation. However, the out-of-Africa model has been complicated by discoveries that challenge the simple replacement narrative. Genetic sequencing has revealed that modern non-African humans carry Neanderthal DNA, approximately 1 to 4% of the genome in European and Asian populations, indicating that interbreeding occurred between modern humans and Neanderthals when they met in Europe and the Middle East. Similarly, some Asian and Oceanic populations carry Denisovan DNA, ranging from trace amounts to as much as 5% in some Melanesian populations. This indicates that human evolution was not a simple linear progression, but a complex process involving multiple species, migrations, and genetic exchanges. Even more intriguingly, there is evidence of what geneticists call ghost populations, unknown hominid species that contributed DNA to modern humans, but whose fossils we have not yet identified. Analysis of African genomes has revealed genetic variants that do not match any known hominid species, suggesting interbreeding with unidentified archaic populations in Africa. The genetic picture of human origins is far more complex than was understood even a decade ago. How does this relate to the ancient astronaut hypothesis? The Anunnaki creation narrative, as interpreted by Sitchin and others, proposes that the Anunnaki genetically modified existing hominids, likely Homo erectus or early Homo heidelbergensis, by introducing their own DNA to create Homo sapiens as a worker species. If this occurred, we might expect to find evidence of sudden genetic changes, not easily explained by gradual evolution, of genetic material that appears without clear ancestral lineage, or of genetic bottlenecks indicating rapid population expansion from a small founding group. Interestingly, genetic evidence does show that modern humans went through a population bottleneck sometime between 70,000 and 100,000 years ago, reducing to perhaps as few as 10,000 to 30,000 individuals. This bottleneck coincides roughly with the Toba supervolcano eruption around 74,000 years ago, and the conventional explanation is that the eruption caused volcanic winter that nearly drove humans to extinction. However, alternative interpretation notes that a population bottleneck is exactly what would result from creating a new species from a small number of founder individuals. If the Anunnaki genetically engineered modern humans from a limited number of modified hominids, those founders would form a genetic bottleneck, and their descendants expanding globally would carry the genetic signature of that founding population. The fact that this bottleneck timing corresponds roughly to the emergence of behavioral modernity in humans, the appearance of sophisticated tools, art, jewelry, complex weapons, and symbolic behavior around 70,000 to 50,000 years ago, is noteworthy. This is when humans suddenly started behaving in recognizably modern ways, demonstrating the cognitive capabilities that distinguish us from earlier hominids. Was this behavioral revolution driven by genetic changes that occurred naturally over time, or does it represent the point at which genetic modifications introduced by the Anunnaki fully manifested in human populations? Let us consider a specific genetic study that has implications for this question. In 2010, a team led by Svante Pääbo published the first draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome. This remarkable achievement allowed direct comparison between Neanderthal and modern human DNA. Among the findings was evidence that modern humans and Neanderthals interbred, but what is particularly interesting is which genes show differences. Some genes involved in metabolism and immune function show clear differences between humans and Neanderthals, which makes sense as adaptations to different environments and pathogen exposures. But there are also significant differences in genes related to cognitive function, brain development, and language. The FOXP2 gene mentioned earlier shows mutations that became fixed in modern humans, but apparently not in Neanderthals, despite Neanderthals having a version closer to the human form than to other apes. Other genes involved in cortical development show human-specific changes. The gene RGAP11B, for instance, exists in humans, but not in Neanderthals or other apes. This gene, when experimentally introduced into mouse embryos, causes increased neural progenitor cells and cortex enlargement, suggesting it plays a role in the expansion of the human neocortex. The origin of archgap11b is mysterious. It appears to be a partial duplication of a gene called archgap11a, but the duplication created a functional new gene rather than a non-functional pseudogene. The duplication event is estimated to have occurred approximately 5 million years ago in the human lineage, but the functional version specific to humans may be more recent. The fact that this gene exists in humans, but not in our closest evolutionary relatives, raises questions about how it arose and became fixed in the population. Standard evolutionary theory accounts for gene duplication and neo-functionalization as natural processes occurring over time, but the specific timing and functional importance of archgap11b in human cognitive evolution makes it noteworthy. Another gene worth examining is HAR1, Human Accelerated Region 1, a segment of DNA that is highly conserved across most mammals, meaning it has changed very little over millions of years of evolution, but shows dramatic changes in humans. HAR1 contains only 118 bases, yet it differs at 18 positions between humans and chimpanzees, despite being nearly identical across other species. This indicates that HAR1 underwent rapid evolution specifically in the human lineage after our split from the chimp-human common ancestor. HR1 is expressed during development of the cerebral cortex and appears to play a role in the organization and structure of cortical layers. The fact that a region so stable across mammalian evolution suddenly underwent rapid change specifically in humans is exactly what we would expect if genetic engineering occurred. Natural evolution tends to be gradual and conservative, especially for functionally important regions where mutations are likely to be harmful. Rapid change in such regions typically requires strong selective pressure. But what selective pressure would drive multiple mutations in a developmental regulatory region within the relatively brief time frame of human evolution? The alternative explanation is that these changes were introduced intentionally by genetic engineers modifying the hominid genome to produce enhanced cognitive capabilities. From a technical genetic engineering standpoint, modifying regulatory regions controlling brain development would be an efficient way to increase intelligence without having to understand and modify every gene involved in cognition. Change the master switches controlling brain size and structure, and you get a more intelligent organism without needing to alter thousands of individual genes. Now, before we go further, I should acknowledge that mainstream geneticists would strongly object to this interpretation. The consensus view is that these genetic changes, while rapid in evolutionary terms, occurred over hundreds of thousands of years through natural mutation and selection, that the selective pressures driving them included climate change, social competition, dietary changes, and other environmental factors that rewarded increased intelligence, and that there is no need to invoke genetic engineering to explain changes that, while unusual, are not impossible under natural evolutionary processes. This skepticism is scientifically justified. The burden of proof for extraordinary claims lies with those making the claims, and genetic evidence that can be explained through natural evolution does not prove artificial genetic engineering, no matter how unusual or rapid the changes appear. However, and this is crucial, the absence of definitive proof does not equal proof of absence. The genetic patterns we observe in human evolution are consistent with natural processes, but are also consistent with artificial intervention. Both explanations can account for the evidence. The question becomes which explanation better fits the totality of evidence when we include not just genetics, but also archaeology, ancient texts, mythology, and cultural traditions. This is why ancient astronaut theory remains intriguing, despite lack of definitive proof. It offers a coherent framework that accounts for multiple categories of evidence that otherwise must be explained through separate, unconnected mechanisms. While we contemplate these genetic mysteries, I want to return to something I mentioned earlier regarding the Sumerian tablets and a specific detail that challenges conventional interpretation. We will explore this in depth shortly, but there is another aspect of the ancient texts that demands attention first: the descriptions of Anunnaki technology and capabilities that sound remarkably like modern or advanced technology when stripped of mythological language. The ancient Mesopotamian texts describe the Anunnaki possessing and using devices and abilities that seem impossible for Bronze Age people to invent from pure imagination. How do illiterate people living 5,000 years ago conceive of flying vehicles? Weapons that shoot fire, devices that produce light without flame, containers that preserve food indefinitely, medical procedures that heal injuries and extend life, and machines that perform complex calculations. Critics argue that these are simply mythological exaggerations, that gods in mythology always have miraculous powers and magical items, that humans have always imagined impossibilities as entertainment, and that attributing technological interpretation to mythological devices is anachronistic. But is it? Let us examine specific examples. The ancient Egyptian text known as the Pyramid texts, among the oldest religious texts in the world, dating to approximately 2400 to 2300 BCE, contains numerous references to the gods using solar boats or sky barges to travel. These vessels are described with considerable specificity, including references to their construction, maintenance, and operation. They are not abstract metaphors, but physical objects with components and functionality. The texts describe the deceased pharaoh joining the gods in the solar boat to sail across the sky. Conventional interpretation views this as pure mythology, the boat representing the sun's daily journey across the sky, personified as a divine vessel. But ancient Egyptians were expert boat builders who understood perfectly well how boats functioned. Why would they describe vehicles capable of flying through the sky using boat terminology, unless they were attempting to describe actual flying vehicles using the closest analogy available in their experience? The Vedic texts from ancient India contain even more explicit descriptions of flying vehicles called vimanas. The Ramayana and Mahabharata, epic texts dating to between 400 BCE and 400 CE, but based on earlier oral traditions, potentially stretching back thousands of years, describe vimanas in remarkable detail. These were not simple flying carpets or divine chariots pulled by magical animals, but sophisticated vehicles with complex mechanical descriptions. The Vaimanika Shastra, a text of disputed age and authenticity, but claiming to preserve ancient knowledge, provides technical specifications for vimanas, including discussions of metals used in construction, power sources, pilot training, flight routes, protection from enemies, and various capabilities including normal flight, hovering, becoming invisible, moving silently, and more. Mainstream historians generally dismiss the Vaimanika Shastra as a 20th century composition claiming ancient authority, and linguistic analysis supports this skepticism. However, the earlier epic texts containing Vimana descriptions cannot be dismissed as modern fabrication. The Mahabharata describes weapons of such destructive power that they sound like nuclear devices. One passage describes a weapon called the Brahmastra, creating an explosion brighter than 1,000 suns, generating intense heat, causing skin and flesh to fall from bodies, making hair and nails fall out, and rendering food poisonous, effects that sound disturbingly like radiation sickness. Another passage describes weapons that create winds and storms, weapons that freeze opponents, weapons that emit fire, and weapons that split the earth. Are these purely imaginative fantasy weapons, or do they preserve distorted memories of actual advanced technology, witnessed and remembered, but not understood? The biblical text contains similar descriptions when examined carefully. The book of Ezekiel, chapter 1, describes the prophet's vision of what is typically interpreted as God's throne chariot. But read the description literally, and it sounds technological. Ezekiel sees a great cloud with flashing fire and brilliant light, within it something like gleaming amber, and within that 4 living creatures in human form, but with 4 faces and 4 wings each. The creatures are accompanied by wheels within wheels covered with eyes all around, the wheels moving in any direction without turning, and the spirit of the living creatures is in the wheels. Above them is something like an expanse shining like crystal, and above that is a throne with a figure having human appearance. The entire apparatus makes a sound like rushing water, or like an army, or like thunder when it moves. Theologians interpret this as visionary symbolism, representing God's omniscience and omnipresence through the eyes, his mobility through the wheels, and his transcendence through the throne above. But But if we read it as an ancient person trying to describe advanced technology, it sounds like he is witnessing a hovering vehicle with rotating components, bright lights, reflective metallic surfaces, multiple viewing ports or sensors that look like eyes, and a humanoid pilot or figure visible through transparent material. The sound like rushing water could describe jet or rocket propulsion. The flashing fire and smoke could describe exhaust or propulsion effects. The wheels within wheels moving in any direction without turning could describe gyroscopic stabilization or omnidirectional propulsion systems. Joseph Blumrich, a NASA engineer who worked on the Saturn V rocket and the space shuttle, initially intended to debunk Erich von Däniken's claim that Ezekiel witnessed a spacecraft. However, after carefully analyzing the biblical text, Blumrich concluded that the description was consistent with an advanced vehicle and even designed a theoretical spacecraft based on Ezekiel's specifications, publishing his analysis in the book The Spaceships of Ezekiel in 1974. While Blumrich's interpretation remains controversial and rejected by mainstream biblical scholars, it demonstrates that trained engineers examining ancient descriptions can find technological plausibility in texts usually dismissed as purely symbolic. The Sumerian texts contain numerous references to the Anunnaki, using devices and objects with remarkable capabilities. The Emes, or Mi, were divine powers or attributes that could be transferred from one god to another or stolen. The Inanna myth describes how Inanna tricks Enki into giving her the mess while he is drunk, then escapes with them before he sobers up and realizes what he has done. The Mis include things like lordship, godship, the throne, the scepter, but also kingship, priesthood, truth, descent into and ascent from the underworld, art of metalwork, art of writing, decision-making, troubled heart, art of the smithy, leatherworking, the holy measuring rod and measuring line, and many others totaling over 100 concepts and capabilities. Traditional interpretation views the Emes as abstract cultural elements, the building blocks of civilization represented as divine attributes that can be transferred or shared. But notice how many are actually technical skills or knowledge categories: metalwork, writing, smithing, measuring tools. What if the Emes were not abstract concepts but actual information storage devices, perhaps crystalline or electronic memory, containing encoded knowledge that could be transferred between individuals? When Inanna steals the Mes, is she stealing abstract authority, or is she stealing actual data devices containing the knowledge and capabilities needed to establish civilization? The myth's emphasis on physical possession of the Mes, the ability to transport them, and Enki's desperate attempts to retrieve them before Inanna reaches her city suggests these were tangible objects of immense value. The texts describe Enki creating humans in the Abzu using specific materials and procedures. If we strip away the mythological framework, we are left with descriptions of a scientific facility where biological experimentation and genetic engineering occurred. The Abzu was associated with fresh water, but also with hidden depths, with special chambers, with places where Enki worked in secret or performed activities hidden from other gods. Could the Abzu have been an underground or underwater research facility? Many ancient sites show evidence of underground structures or water-related engineering that seems technologically advanced for their supposed time period. The Osiris shaft beneath the Giza Plateau descends over 30 meters through solid bedrock, ending in a chamber at the water table level. Its purpose remains mysterious. Derinkuyu and other underground cities in Cappadocia, Turkey, descend multiple levels deep, accommodating thousands of people with sophisticated ventilation systems, water management, and structural engineering. While conventionally dated to the first millennium BCE as refugees during times of invasion, some researchers question whether these represent repurposing of much older structures. The Hal Saflieni Hypogeum in Malta is an underground complex carved from solid limestone, descending 3 levels, containing elaborate carved features and demonstrating acoustic properties that amplify certain sound frequencies. Radiocarbon dating of materials found at the site suggests it was used around 3600 to 2500 BCE, but the carving of the chambers themselves could be older. Why would ancient people invest enormous labor in creating complex underground facilities? Standard explanations include religious purposes, burial chambers, storage facilities, defensive refuges, and living spaces in areas where surface conditions were harsh. All of these are plausible, but they do not fully explain the scale and sophistication of some underground complexes. If the Anunnaki established research facilities underground to conduct genetic experiments and other activities, they preferred to keep hidden from the general population. Underground chambers at ancient sites might represent remnants of those facilities, later reused by humans for other purposes, but originally constructed with advanced technology that allowed efficient excavation through hard rock. This speculation cannot be proven without finding intact Anunnaki technology, but it offers an alternative framework for understanding archaeological anomalies. Right now, I want to pose a question to you, and I genuinely want to hear your thoughts in the comments. The ancient texts describe gods or advanced beings creating humans through biological manipulation, establishing civilization by teaching knowledge to primitive people, and interbreeding with humans to create hybrid bloodlines that became ruling dynasties. Archaeological evidence shows that sophisticated civilization appeared relatively suddenly in multiple locations, that monumental architecture was constructed at time periods when humans supposedly lacked the organization and technology to build such structures, and that ancient peoples globally claimed divine ancestry for their rulers and divine origin for their cultural knowledge. Genetic evidence shows anomalies and rapid changes in human evolution that, while explainable through natural processes, are also consistent with artificial genetic engineering. Taking all of this together, do you find the ancient astronaut hypothesis plausible as one possible explanation for these patterns? Or do you believe conventional explanations adequately account for all the evidence without requiring extraordinary interventions? This is not asking you to accept or reject ancient astronaut theory definitively, but rather to assess whether it deserves serious investigation as a hypothesis or should be dismissed as pseudoscience. Share your honest perspective in the comments. The diversity of viewpoints helps us examine these questions from multiple angles, and respectful debate advances understanding more than echo chambers ever can.